As co-hosts of the Visible Women podcast, we did not want to let this opportunity to celebrate and shout out the visible women that participated in the political process in the midterm elections. For so many of us, justice herself was on the ballot, and we witnessed a record number of women of color, LGBTQ candidates, other women of diverse identities participate in record numbers. And so whether or not the folks we were watching won or lost, we wanted to be able to celebrate their bravery, their courage, and their badass resolve to participate in the political process and really make personal and professional sacrifices to do so. So Corinne, can you share a little bit about what you've been noticing in the numbers so far?
So first I want to say that we're coming to you semi-live because we're going to edit minimally and add a little music in our intro, but we're semi-live today because we wanted to come to you right after the midterms and not delay our discussion with production. So here's how it breaks down. 117 women were elected overall. Before that, only 1 out of 5 members of Congress were women. 42 women of color were elected, 40 to the House, 1 to the Senate, and 1 will serve as governor. 100 of those women were Democrats and 17 were Republicans. But the other interesting thing is when we break down local races, local, state, and federal races, there were 400 Black women in the game and participating in this political process. And we want to applaud each and every one of them, whether they won or lost. That takes guts. And if you want to see change, you've got to be the person that makes the change. You've got to be the change you want to see. So bravo to them.
Bravo.
So let's shout out some of the people who were the first. The youngest member of Congress will be from Queens, like me, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who's only 29. And she came her opponent in the primary, though she came out of nowhere, but she ran a strategic campaign. And although people wanted to peg her as a socialist and make that a bad word, she stood her ground and her principles, and she emerged victorious.
We had a couple of firsts from New England. So Ayanna Pressley was the first Black woman elected to Congress from Massachusetts. And Jahana Hayes was the first Black woman to represent Connecticut in the House. So New England is doing big things, and we want to shout them out. In addition, Native women turned out in miraculous ways. So Deborah Haaland, who's from the Pueblo of Laguna tribe, and Sharice Davids from the Ho-Chunk tribe in Kansas, were the first Native American women elected to Congress. And Davids also has the distinction of being the first gay Native American lawmaker in Congress. So not only are women from the margins really just stepping into the space in remarkable ways, but those most marginalized, when you think of Native communities, really in sort of the decimation that's happened to tribal lands and sort of the ways in which they've been marginalized. I think it's so remarkable to have these two women stepping into the space.
So in Texas, 2 Latina women won. Veronica Escobar and Sylvia Garcia are both headed to Congress, and we congratulate them. So although Beto didn't win in Texas, there were some significant wins that can chip away at some of the inequity that's happening in Congress.
Yeah, and so the other kind of toxic dialogue I think that's taking place is really one that focuses on xenophobia. So we were so pleased to be able to shout out two visible women, Muslim women, that are emerging in Michigan and in Minnesota. So Rashida Tlaib and Ilan Omar are now members of Congress. I shared with Corinne a quote from a September summit celebrating women of color in politics, where Rashida said, "Yes, you will have to learn how to say our names." And so we want to shout you both out today. Uh, we're learning your names, we're sharing your names, and we look forward to hearing what great things you do on behalf of your districts in Congress.
And then with the governor's races, while we know that as of this morning, Stacey Abrams is still in the fight, we do know that Michelle Lujan Grisham emerged victorious in New Mexico, and she is the first Democratic Latina elected governor in the United States. So bravo and congratulations to her.
One quick thing I wanted to add about the Stacey Abrams race, Corinne, is, I was watching the returns last night and I was looking at so many regions of Georgia as strong red regions. And what I tried to hold on to was a story that you and I both noted and got so excited about. So we wanted to shout out also the domestic workers who knocked on doors on behalf of Stacey Abrams and learned from some reporting that there is a 140-year tradition of domestic workers fighting for economic empowerment. It started in 1881 in Atlanta as women who cleaned toilets, frankly, decided to go on strike to demand increased wages. So those are women whose names we don't know, but we have to shout them out as visible. They put their selves on the line, and in spite of Georgia remaining Georgia, I think their impact is going to live far beyond this moment.
And what's interesting is, unprecedented, the number of women of color in races, but also unprecedented examples of voter suppression and intimidation. Now, not unprecedented historically, but in this modern age, or so-called modern age, we are just seeing how much our vote matters, I would say first, and then also how much the opposition understands that our vote matters. So they work hard to suppress our vote, the redlining, and all the other strategies that they use to keep us, I would say, quote unquote, in check and not let us, but we are still winning. I mean, bit by bit, do not despise small beginnings, because these little wins are not little. They're bigger than you can imagine because they can affect change. So I think that is a really important point.
Yeah, I think our shout out is part of this small beginnings, that we did not want to let this moment pass without celebrating it. If indeed we're committed to increasing the visibility of women of color and on the margins, then how could we not weigh in on this moment historically? There were also some races at the state level that we want to make sure you know about. If you weren't paying attention to attorney general races across the nation, there is actually on Twitter, I was following a site that just sort of looked at what happened in the attorney general space. There are two that we wanted to highlight. One is January Contreras from Arizona, whose issues related to consumer protection, the opioid epidemic, charter school oversight, environmental issues, and key issue for that state, the Affordable Care Act and how it impacts Arizonans, were the key issues that she highlighted. And so we want to shout her out and celebrate her. And of course, our homegirl from New York, Brooklyn Roots, Tish James, successfully competed to be Attorney General of New York State. And we want to congratulate her as well.
Yes. And so all of these women have emerged victorious because women of color got out and voted. And it is very interesting to see how, when you look at the charts and the breakdowns of key races, how the percentages stack up. So as was in the presidential election, many white women still support candidates that may actually go against their own interests. And they don't, maybe they realize it, or maybe they just do it because they want to go down the party lines. But it's fascinating to watch the breakdowns of the voting blocks and see who is actually supporting what candidate and how things could have shifted as a result.
Yeah, what killed me is how off in some cases the polling was. And so it really makes me wonder whether or not people are just lying or don't feel comfortable saying in a forthright way who they're supporting, or maybe the polling folks are just missing a subset of constituents, demographics, or not asking the right questions. So it is a curious thing that 2 election cycles in a row, the polling is not capturing what is clearly a core underlying sentiment for segments of this country.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it is, I think both the polling and news stories are crafted in a certain way, and they don't always represent the truth. I mean, not the entire story, I'll say that, because it is a truth from a specific perspective, but they're not, I don't feel like they're digging hard enough to find the full story.
Yeah.
And I also think that the people that are opposed to the candidates that we may be interested in watch these things carefully and galvanize their troops, galvanize their constituents to go counter to that and do it silently.
Yeah.
So all of these stories about, and all of the polls that put our candidates ahead are always skewed because they're not getting the whole story.
Yeah.
And we can't get complacent with the what seems like a slam dunk, like the blue wave, because it sounds like a good news story. And instead, we need to really walk cautiously and look at every scenario, I think.
Yeah.
And what I wanted to point out, I was mentioning earlier to Kim that I really, what came to mind today for me was the book, The Black Calhouns by Gail Lamette Buckley, because it looks at the history of Lena Horne's family from Reconstruction through the Civil Rights Movement and beyond, but it looks at the two factions, the family members that stayed in the South and the family members that came up north. And often we are given or have the idea that that you can't make any progress in the South. But if we look at both the story illustrates and this election and just illustrates to me that just because you're in that environment in the South, which we tend to think is more racist, et cetera, does not mean that we cannot impact change. And if you look at the races that are most contentious and have the impact, like Stacey Abrams, to do so, they're happening in the South. So we have to look at that and realize that it's not just the coasts that are making change. It's every state. It's quote unquote the flyover states that are making real moves here that we have to pay attention to, and that we can build upon to make real change.
Yeah, I think your point about the nuance, when we talked about the poll thing and how there's a nuance there that is perhaps being missed, I think that can actually work to our favor as well, because
Yes.
there's a nuance about our women of color, about our communities. And to your point about the South, right? It's painted with sort of a monolithic red brush. And if you unpack it, there may be more there to mine for, like what messages are landing in the South for communities of color and for rural communities and for low socioeconomic communities. So it's a place that I feel like some of these candidates have spent some time and are making moves. I wanted to do one local shout out. So we did sort of national and we did some statewide shout outs. So we wanted to do one that caught our attention and say Sean King coined this, so we can borrow it for the purpose of this episode. So we want to shout out the 19 Black women, badass Black girl magic, who were victorious in joining the judiciary in Harris County, Texas. They stand out not just because they represented communities of color, but about the potential that they hold for impacting and administering justice in new ways within Texas. So to your point about the South, right?
Yeah.
Texas, and yet somehow all 19 of these women were successful in their bids. I have one other local one.
Okay.
So she's somebody that's an alum of a leadership program I was in New York City called Coro Leadership New York. So I want to shout out Catalina Cruz from Queens, who won her bid for the state assembly. And notable about her success is that she's a dreamer. She came to this country as an undocumented immigrant, and she did not have legal status. She is a former dreamer. She's married a citizen, but her grassroots and community-focused campaign really resonated with the voters in Queens. And now she's heading to Albany, and we're excited to see what happens there.
Yeah, that's great. So what would you say is the road forward from here?
Yeah.
What do we do to continue this fight and to stay energized in the face of not getting everything we wanted?
So I think that the danger is to believe that we only achieve this through a reactionary response. That things have to get really bad before people engage. And I think there is, to the point about subtle messages, I think there was a movement afoot, even beyond this sort of, I don't know, crazy, discouraging climate that we find ourselves in that needs nurture. So my answer is the conversations that we now can have in robust ways in the online space, in our communities, in our churches, and those are ripe for, and our sororities, I'll just shout that out, are ripe for generating new talent, are ripe for putting forth the possibility that civic engagement is not the ultimate sacrifice, that you can make a difference, that your voice can matter. And I think these these ways in which the women we've been talking about have penetrated the space will continue to grow new people. At least I can tell you that my 12-year-old is totally excited about running for class president in 7th grade. And I know that there's a connection between what happened yesterday, what's been happening over the last 2 years, and her decision. I wanted to share real quick. So we've been listening on the ride to school every morning, like our favorite tunes. And this one is what we played this morning because I told her we would be doing a live episode of the podcast. And so it's a YouTube video that we love by Rihanna J. And I'll just read you a couple of lines from the song. It's called Undefeated. So it says, I've been through it. I've been watching, trying to see how I do it, how I make it look so easy. I've been working twice as hard for half the love, make it perfect, but they tell me it ain't enough. You ain't ever walked in my shoes. You ain't ever had to do what I have to do. No, I didn't choose it, but I'm going to use it. Yeah, fall down, get up twice. Keep my head up high. Make the sacrifice. Oh, yeah. I won't minimize. I won't dim my light because I'm going to win this fight.
Yes. And that is what we have to really, really, those words are perfect. And we should all listen to that song. But we need the fuel for the fight. We need to find the songs, the words, the scriptures, if you are Christian, or the other words, if you are from another religious background. But you find your words to fuel you, and you find the songs that fuel you, and you find the strength to keep going, because this is not over. I mean, you have to think that, yes, these are small steps, but you chip away to make change. They don't, we are in a world where we see overnight sensations, but very rarely are they true. So every win leads to another win. And we have to look at it that way and keep fighting and keep winning.
That's a good word.
Yeah. So this has been our first semi-live Visible Woman bonus episode. And we hope that you will enjoy it. And we look forward to having more discussions like this, as well as continuing conversations on our podcast. So you know that our regular podcast is every other Wednesday. So look for us actually next week for a new episode. And until then, we keep shouting out the visible woman out there. We see you.
Remember, we see you.